Okay, folks, welcome to episode 33 of the Don't Be Ridiculous podcast. Just watched two pretty good NBA playoff games.
I mean, the second one better than the first, but
Clearly, yeah.
yeah.
But very interesting goings on. I thought the first round was one of the best first rounds that we've had, and I'm so excited about all four of these first round series for different reasons. But yeah, but you had something you want to talk about first before we get to the games
Oh
today?
yeah. Okay, so I guess we'll get this out of the way because the Nets are the Nets have been out of the playoffs for a week now, right? A week,
Yeah.
almost a week. Yeah.
Yep.
So God, it's been a week. That's crazy. But anyway, there was a whole thing that everyone was ripping Ben Simmons, and I thought for good reason because it was like, oh, it's my back. No, now it's my mental health. No, it's my back. Well, my mental health, my back is being triggered by my mental. It's like, what is this? What's good? And then the other thing was that we were like, dude, you haven't played in a year. How the hell did you hurt your back? Like
Right.
it just seems odd, you know. So I thought he got a bunch of criticism that was justified, and it was also just kind of like, well, he might come back, you know. But the whole time Steve Nash is saying he's not going to come back, but then it's like his camp is like trying to make it seem like he's going to come back. It's like, can you just pick something? So I thought he got a lot of criticism that was well deserved, but leave it to the media ecosystem to figure out some way to bring up old stuff and then use the Ben Simmons thing to like criticize other stuff that happened to fit into their whole narrative. So do you remember during the Olympics when Simone Biles didn't participate in one of the events?
Right.
She said she had a mental health issue. She was, which made sense because in that event, like if you're screwed up and you're not exactly sure where you are, you could like break your freaking neck. Okay. It's not the same thing as like playing basketball where, I mean, I guess you could break your neck playing basketball, but it would probably be a pretty freak accident. It wouldn't be something like, so, people like Clay Travis, even Doug Gottlieb was kind of on this. They were basically saying that, it's ridiculous that we're allowed to criticize Ben Simmons this way, but no one was criticizing Simone Biles this way. And so I'm listening to this stuff and I'm like, okay, time out. Like you guys are okay. I think one of the reasons that we're so critical of Ben Simmons is that he has not earned the benefit of the doubt. He hasn't won anything. Simone Biles had already won stuff. Okay. And it's as far as from what I believe, she stat out that one event, but she was in other events. I think at the Olympics. Right. It was just that one particular.
Right.
So they're saying, oh, well, it's just, it's because we can't criticize women. And I'm like, well, I'd be naive to say that probably wasn't part of it. I do think there is some aspect of that in our culture where maybe people aren't going to be so critical of women as they would be critical of men. But I just found that whole point ridiculous. Doug Gottlieb was talking about this too. And he's like, well, women want equal treatment, but it's like, but Ben Simmons is not being treated equally the way, Simone Biles was treated. And I'm like, that really doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Like I said, Ben Simmons, from all indications, Ben Simmons doesn't give a shit. Like he didn't give a shit in college. Well, like we've talked about this on the podcast, like he just didn't care. So he didn't care. He hasn't won anything. And then the way he treated the Philadelphia 76ers, it's kind of like, well, yeah, we're going to be critical of you because it seems like you're just jerking people around, being critical of someone who sits out one event and they've already won stuff because, they're, mentally they're not quite right. And in that sport, if you're not mentally quite right when you're flipping around, you're going to break something. I think that's a completely different thing. So I thought that was pretty ridiculous. And then I think there was one other thing I'm trying to think of that I was going to point out about it. Just in terms of, okay. The other thing I was going to say is that like the thing I said before about, well, people may be more critical of men than they are of women, in sports. And I'm like, that may be true, but I'll give you just an example here. I'm not criticizing Simone Biles, but Naomi Osaka, the women's tennis player, she's like not wanting to take any questions from the media and, breaking down in tears over simple questions that she's getting asked at her press availability at tournaments. And then saying she's going to sit out the press availability at tennis tournaments. That seems a little ridiculous, And again, I understand we're trying to be sensitive to people's mental health, but that just seems odd to me. I think it's a legitimate criticism to make.
But
whereas with the other thing, I think it's a false. They're trying to make a through line between the Ben Simmons and the Simone Biles thing, and I don't think it's there. I think it's a ridiculous thing that people are doing where they have this narrative and then they just filter everything through. And then the other thing that I just wanted to kind of point out, especially with stuff on so Clay Travis is kind of, in some sense, he's kind of in new media because he does a YouTube show and he has a website, Outkick the Coverage. Now, granted, he's on terrestrial radio in the slot that Rush Limbaugh was in. Anyway, so that's obviously traditional media, but with the online stuff, that's more new media. Okay. And it's kind of disturbing to me that, like, okay, I thought the point of new media that we weren't going to do the same crap that cable news does, where we basically just filter everything through a narrative and it's the same crap over and over and over. Like, I thought we were going to like analyze stuff, like, because we have more time to analyze it, because in new media, you can get more time to really discuss stuff. So anyway, right. I just,
yeah, that was I mean, number one, I would say Naomi Osaka. These are three completely different situations.
Well, absolutely. Yeah,
Naomi Osaka is playing in the events. It's not exactly. Like she's not going to play.
Yeah,
and she does. She plays, and she plays pretty well. So that's So that's the first thing.
I was just in terms of the mental health thing. I think there's right. Maybe a through line with all three of those things. Right. That's all I was really pointing out there.
Right. And Ben Simmons, refused to play because of the situation. First of all, let's go back to the beginning, right? The initial reason he refused to come back to Philadelphia was supposedly because of the criticism that he got from the coach and from his teammates. He didn't want to play there anymore.
Criticism, I think. I mean,
right. Regardless, but he didn't want to play there anymore, regardless of anything else, mental health, physical issues, any of that. So that's where this starts. Number one, he's getting paid $30 million a year and is refusing to play.
Yeah.
So that's a different animal. The other thing you talked about credibility, Simone Biles is basically the Michael Jordan of gymnastics.
Absolutely.
So if she misses one event. First of all, there was only a few people that were really criticizing her for, you got to get out there and whatever. There was only a handful of people.
Jason Whitlock at the time being fucking ridiculous about it.
It was only a few people who were really on her about any of that. So, number one, she didn't get that much criticism. But to say that, these things are so vastly different that you can't really go, this is a male-female thing. It's like, no, it's much more of a credibility thing because Ben Simmons refused to play. Then he kind of like, I'm not going to get all my money. So then he goes to practice and kind of screws around, doesn't really take it seriously. So he's doing, everything that people don't like Ben Simmons is doing.
Right.
And then
the last thing I would point out, I just remember this now. This was the other thing to point out. Okay. It's fair to say this because there is a stereotype about millennials and Generation Z, even more so, that millennials and Generation Z seem to think that they're the only generation ever that's experienced any anxiety about anything, and that's a stereotype. Again, it's not true of all of it, but there's an aspect of that. Okay. And so I think what happens is people latch onto that. And then they think when people start talking about this, that's what it is. It's like, no, sometimes it may be that. But sometimes it's really not. You have to look at each individual situation. So that's just really poor analysis of the situation.
Yeah, and so then it starts talking about mental health, which, okay, those are legitimate concerns. But my point is, how did you get to this point in your career? You know what I mean? Like, so don't tell me you didn't have a way to handle it before, and now you can't handle it. It's all tied. You can't just point out one thing in Ben Simmons' situation. It's all tied together. And then the other thing that was really ridiculous, and the team should be blamed for this also, is the constant stuff coming out. Well, he's targeting this game, and he might be back this game. And then before Game 3, he says, well, I'm going to play Game 4. It's like, okay, well.
You're jerking us around, dude. Like, come on.
Don't tell us that, okay? Don't tell us that, and then come back and go, no, I can't because of blah. Well, this is what's going to happen. And I think that Simone Biles got There was it was a pretty big deal when it happened. I think she got plenty of criticism, but she had then came back and performed in the same Olympics. Okay?
Yeah.
It's not like Ben Simmons said, I'm not going to play Thursday night, and then showed up at the game on Sunday.
Again, that's a credibility issue. You get more credibility because I'm just like, well, that one particular event, okay, you know. Yeah, and it's kind of like, it's the same thing. Remember that documentary we both watched about Marty Fish, the tennis player? Yeah, he had already won stuff, and then he just had a freaking nervous breakdown or whatever, and he couldn't play that one tournament, which was like, okay, I understand that. And then he eventually later, he sort of got over that, and he's like, I got to go back to this tournament, and I got to play here. I think he lost, but so what? He like got over the thing. Like, okay, dude, you've got credibility on that, because it seems like you were really like, it was really. I am interested though. Like the last point I'll make is that, like, remember like different stuff that would happen in baseball where there'd be like players who couldn't throw the ball to first base or something.
Yep.
To me, that's almost like a similar thing to like what they were talking about with Simone Biles, where you got like the yips, where you just can't, like, it's like a mental like thing. I'm just wondering how. I mean, granted, the sports media ecosystem wasn't as big as it is now. Back then, when you would hear about stuff like that, but I just wonder how they were analyzed at the time. I think people kind of were just like, "What's going on here?"
Yeah, I think it would be the thing that's getting that's causing a lot of trouble with the Ben Simmons situation is the Brooklyn Nets don't really know what the problem is, and that's exhibited by the fact that they are completely misreading everything that's going on and giving us nonsense information. So the team doesn't understand what's going on with him. So how the hell are we supposed to understand it?
Yeah.
So yeah, this is completely, and listen, but I thought Charles Barkley made a really good point on television when he said, look, it's when other players are now concerned about, they don't believe in you. They don't really believe that you care about playing or any of that. And this is your teammates that are saying that. That's a serious problem. Forget us. Like, Ben Simmons will never get the respect of Philadelphia fans ever. He's never going to get the respect of a lot of media people. That's out the window. Forget that. But when his teammates are looking, and all the stories that are coming out now where his teammates are looking at him like, dude, what's the deal, man?
Yeah.
So this is where this is a serious problem. And it goes,
all you people who thought that was such a good trade for Brooklyn, I'm like, what the hell are you talking about?
Not to toot my own horn, but I called it. Okay, I called it. I said it was a bad move for both sides, and I think what's happening now is bearing out. This is a bad move for both sides. We'll see what happens with Philadelphia on that side, but to me, and I heard Zach Lowe on his podcast said it this week. Maybe this was just a bad move for both sides. Maybe this is a bad move for everybody. No one's saying that, but that's exact to me, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Well, and James Harden, like, he had a good game. He had a good closeout game. Well, sort of. He had a good quarter, and then he was making plays for people. But it's like, okay, so you mean to tell me you're not going to get MVP level James Harden, which to me means he's either going to be at this level or declining for the next few years. And you're telling me, have they already signed him to an extension, or is that what we're assuming is coming? Okay.
No, but he can opt in for 1 year, or he can opt out and try to get a bigger deal. Same situation Kyrie's in. And so I think that, I heard Colin Cowherd say last week, well, maybe, I think they can still win if Harden's the third best player on their team. And I went, no, they can't.
No,
they can't. No. Tyrese Maxey is not going to give you 25 a game. He can do it sometimes. And, he's good. Looks like a really promising young player, but he's not ready to be that guy right now.
Yeah.
So, and the big issue now for Brooklyn is with trying to improve their roster is the Ben Simmons thing.
Yeah.
They're done. They should have traded for spare parts instead of taking one guy with a big contract, because now their options are severely limited. They can't improve
well, that's
the team.
thing. I think earlier this week, Dan Patrick was talking about, you need depth. And I'm just like, I'm not saying that that's complete BS, but dude, okay. The Nets literally almost won all 4 games in that series. Okay.
Right.
Even with all their crap, they almost won all 4 games.
Right.
Okay. So, And by the way, their defense atrocious? It wasn't great, but it wasn't like it was. I mean, there were times during those games where the defense was good enough, but they didn't make. I heard some people talking about, like I listened to that Jason Timp podcast a lot on YouTube, and he's talking about how there's running sets in the playoffs is less effective because the defense is so intense and it's so much more physical that it's harder to get. And like if a set works once, well, you can't really use it again because they're keying in on it every game, which I agree with to an extent. But I do think that there may have been things that they could have done with Durant to get him the ball in an easier situation, like have him run through a couple different screens or something like that. That maybe that would have helped.
Well, this is what I've heard is that Adam Lefkoe was on Dan Patrick last week. Adam Lefkoe from TNT, he's a broadcaster, and he was saying like he was watching, was at those games and said like the Celtics had hand signals and they would call in what defensive coverage they wanted to run, and Marcus Smart is putting everybody in the right place. Brooklyn had no plays at all. Basically, there was a time where he was describing where Dragic is out on the floor looking at Steve Nash going, "What are we running?" And Steve Nash turns around to his coaches, doesn't have any idea. So Dragic is like, "All right, I got it." Like Brooklyn didn't run any sets. There were no.
They didn't. Yeah, okay.
They had no idea what they were doing.
That's a valid criticism. The lack of continuity, having Kyrie Irving as one of your best players, right. And again, still, even with all that, they were in all 4 games,
right?
So I'm not saying the depth doesn't matter, but you need. I mean, like we were watching Boston today. They don't really have. Tatum and Jaylen Brown had bad games, okay, but they don't really have a lot of star power. So I just like it's kind of funny though. We've been critical maybe of Milwaukee because they pack the paint and they give up open threes. Well, when the other team doesn't make threes, it looks like a really good strategy because Milwaukee was packing the paint and the Celtics could not get in there, and they're just like, all right, well, we better make our threes. And they didn't make enough threes.
All right.